Sorry, that was really loud. I wasn't even yelling.
All right, we are going to call the Board Finance Subcommittee meeting today, October 18th, 2021 to order at 5:53. And what we're going to have is representatives from Plant Moran, Jennifer Chambers, and Kevin Teratuta give us a presentation of the financial audit that we just went through for the school year ending June 30th, 2021. So I'll turn it over to them for their presentation.
All right, if it's okay, I'm gonna keep my mask off so I can talk to you guys and not come out of breath here. So Kevin and I are happy to be here tonight. I know it's a little bit different presenting to you this way, and we'll be doing our presentation at the board meeting, as Scott mentioned, but we wanted to just make sure we had an opportunity to go through the financial results with you of the audit and go through any questions that you might have with the information. So in your packets, you should have received the report to the Board of Education. And so I'll talk about that in a minute, but that is the audit communication letter from us to the board. You would have also received the financial report, which is also what we refer to as the financial statements. The report for federal awards, or the single audit report. And then we also have the graph presentation. So as it relates to the audit results, I'm pleased to report to you that we felt that the audit went very smoothly. Scott and his team were extremely prepared for us. We did our work predominantly in August, as well as in June when we did the preliminary work, which I spoke to you about in June when we did the pre-audit communication. The results of the audit is an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. So that is a clean opinion, the highest form of assurance that we can provide that the financial statements are materially correct. We also issued an unmodified opinion on the single audit or the federal awards report. That one is the compliance-based report on those federal grants specifically. And this year we selected the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF, and Education Stabilization Fund, which for you is predominantly ESSER. Those were the two federal programs that we selected for testing, and we did not identify any findings or question costs or any compliance issues associated with those as well. And this year, with the significant influx of the emergency response grants, the COVID type grants, the single audit is pretty much more risky than it has been in the past. Not anything specific to Chippewa. This would be true for all districts, just given the fact that these are new grants. Many of the rules were kind of being determined as districts were trying to plan how to spend them. So there was changes along the way. So there was elevated risks associated with these funds. So I think it just speaks even more strongly that there were no issues identified in the deployment of those. And we will talk a little bit more about what's kind of coming up as it relates to the future of the federal funds in the next couple of years. In the report to the Board of Education, so this would be the end of audit letter. There's a couple of sections in this deliverable. The first section, results of the audit, really just communicates to you that we completed the audit as we had planned, that we did not identify any significant adjustments during the process, and really just reconfirms our responsibility to you as the auditor to provide you an opinion on the financial statements. The second half of the letter is informational. There's a number of pages that talk about a host of different things. It's really our intent to just provide you that as an additional resource in educating you on everything that's going on with regards to the status of state funding. There's a pretty lengthy description about the federal funds, just so that you have again, to kind of supplement what you get in other avenues to help round out that information with regards to what's going on with the state of funding. One thing to note, I guess, as we think about what's kind of coming down the pipeline from a funding perspective, and I know Scott has discussed this with you as well, is just the changes that came through that are now in effect for fiscal 22 with regards to the change in the foundation allowance funding. So your per pupil state funding went up from $8,111 per pupil to now in fiscal 22 being $8,700 per pupil. That is one component of your overall state funding. The other component that per pupil amount is multiplied by is your enrollment. And so changes in enrollment will also obviously play a factor in that. But this was a pretty substantial change at the state level. They were able to push through kind of getting everyone as equal as possible or on equal footing, which has long been an intent of trying to get districts funded at a more equal level. So this step that was taken for fiscal 22 really kind of was a big step in that direction. And for you, as we've talked about in the past, who is historically on the lower end of the funding, this was a pretty substantial change. As it relates to the federal funds, we do have a graph that Kevin will cover to help kind of pictorially just display the element of the federal funds that are coming through. But in addition to what we saw here in fiscal 21, which was predominantly CRF and ESSER 1, as I mentioned, in fiscal 22 and in the next couple of years, you'll also be getting ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds. And so that continued elevated risk associated with these newer federal emergency response grants will remain. And so for the next couple of years here, we'll have that from an audit perspective to contend with in terms of making sure that the compliance is in line and that the spending is done in accordance with what those guidelines are. Before we turn it over to Kevin with the graph presentation, are there any questions? Anything within the financial statements that you'd like me to point out or go through, or we can move along and see if there's any questions sparked by the graphs? No? Okay, I'll turn it over to Kevin. The first slide, when I present in the public meeting, is just essentially a briefer overview of what I just said. So that'll be the first slide in the presentation, so we can move along to the first graphical one.
All right, so this part of the presentation will cover the financial results of the district, starting here with general fund revenue for the most recent fiscal year ended June of 2021. So the total revenue and other financing sources of the district for this most recent year was approximately $180.2 million. And that little asterisk, as we kind of like to remind you annually, there's a component of that, which is $13.1 million, which kind of flows through the state for the retirement funding and isn't necessarily usable dollars for the district. So you kind of see that on both the revenue and expenditure side. So revenue and other financing sources come from several different components, the largest of which is your state membership aid, making up about 67.6% of all the dollars received by the district. If we're going to follow this kind of pie chart around clockwise, that next group would be property taxes at about $4.1 million. And then the next couple slices kind of help break out into a little more detail how these new COVID fundings kind of affected revenue for the district. So on a recurring basis, this sort of yellowish tan slice of the pie is that federal recurring revenue stream. So that's what the district typically spends for example, Title I or child nutrition. So that $5.5 million is kind of annually received by the district for those costs. But new this year are those COVID-related fundings at the federal and state level, which combined make up about $9.9 million and are about 5.5% of the overall revenue sources for this most recent fiscal year. So as we go on to the next slide, we can kind of see that played out in more detail, looking at 21 and 2020. So from 2021 to, from 2020 to 2021, there was approximately a $20 million increase in total revenues, 9.9 of which, as I mentioned, was related to that sort of new one-time COVID-19 revenue streams that have come through. And so that component, if you're looking year over year, that state membership aid slice of the pie has kind of decreased year over year, but it's this new allocation of funding that has kind of made up that difference year over year. So then the next slide we look at is expenditures of the general fund for June of 2021. And total expenditures and other financing uses of the district totaled approximately $177.8 million. And the pie chart in front of you kind of outlines the allocation of how those dollars are spent. So the largest slice here, the instruction and instructional support services at about 80.5%. Those are what we like to consider your in-classroom dollars. So for every dollar spent by the district, approximately 80% or 80 cents of that goes towards the education of children. If we look at that on a comparative basis year over year from 2020 to 2021, kind of in the same vein of the increase in revenues, there was that also another increase in expenditures of approximately $17.5 million. However, when you look at the two pie charts year over year, you'll notice that the allocation of how those dollars are spent remains largely unchanged, with one exception to that instruction and instructional support, where year over year, we might typically not see a significant swing in how these are allocated. But there was that 1.5% increase into instruction and instructional support services from 2020 to 2021. The next graph just presents that same information, but instead of year over year for the district, it's now just for the most recent fiscal year ended as compared to statewide percentage of all Michigan districts. So the data on the right-hand graph is from June of 2020, which is the most recent available data we have. However, the slices of this pie chart don't change very much. And so it's still a reasonable comparison to look at our current fiscal year and statewide. So what you'll notice here is that large component of the instruction of children, that instruction and instructional support services for Chippewa Valley is at 80.5%, where at statewide it's 74.3% or so. So the next slide, we dive into a little bit more detail just on the sources and components that have made up this new COVID revenue streams and allocations to the district. So the top bar in each kind of category of funding is the total amount awarded, and the orange column or the orange bar in the bottom graph is how much has been expended as of June 30th, 2021. So the coronavirus relief fund and ESSER, and then the ESSER 2 stabilization, all that award has been expended by the district. However, as Jennifer mentioned, there's still a component of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 that has been awarded that will be used in the coming years. And with this chart, and what we found out very recently is there's a discretionary component of ESSER 3 of approximately $6.4 million, which doesn't necessarily show on this chart, but that was just approved very recently and is also added to the allocation to the district. So year over year, now that we've kind of taken a look at revenue and expenditures, we see how that affects the general fund balance. So beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2020 was approximately $30 million. There was an excess of revenues over expenditures of $2.4 million. So your ending fund balance is $32.4 million. Another way of looking at fund balance is how much of fund balance is a percentage of the expenditures incurred by the district. So at June 30th, 2021, that ratio was about 18.2%, whereas last year was about 18.7%. Another way to think about your general fund balance is if there was no new revenue coming in, if all of a sudden that stopped, the general fund would be able to operate and or hold the operations of the district for about 66.5 days. The next set of slides is the general fund balance over a 10-year kind of look back and how that has looked. So over the last 10 years, the district has been able to generally increase its fund balance year over year. But as we kind of mentioned, as you saw a sneak peek in the prior slide, if we want to go to the next one, we'll see that that general fund balance as a percentage of expenditures has been relatively unchanged for the last 5 years. So somewhere in between that 17.5 to 18, 19% range is kind of where the general fund is stabilized over the last several years. Our final slide we have for you is just a quick comparison again on a wider scale, looking at the general fund balance as compared to other Macomb County districts and at the statewide level. So Chippewa Valley is kind of highlighted towards the bottom there. 18.72% again was the June 2020 number, because for this chart, that was the most recently available information that we have. But it is 18.22% for 2021. Statewide average is just under 15%, and you're able to see kind of where the rest of Macomb County districts fall in that general fund balance ratio. That kind of covers it for the financial results portion of our audit. Was there any questions or anything we might be able to answer for you? All right, thank you.
We're good, if you're good. Just want to make sure. I know we threw a lot of information at you, so if you want a minute or two to see if there's any questions. I know when we were preparing for this information, I think the graph with the COVID funding is something that we envision will be presented over the next couple of years to kind of track, what we saw expended to date, since it will span several years. But after that several year period is up with these grants, then that funding source will no longer be there. And so just kind of keeping that time frame window in mind, I think will be helpful to just see how that progression is over the next few years.
Are there any questions of Jennifer or Kevin? Okay, I'm going to spend a couple minutes going back through these slides. I want to point out a couple of things in here. If you go back to slide 5 and 6. So under slide 5, it shows you how we expend our how our expenditures are broken down by major categories. And if you look at the right-hand side, which says 2020, which is last year, you can see that when you're in the area of school and general administration and business services, you see 8.1% of our $160 million was spent in that area. If you turn to the next page, and under page 6, you can see the statewide percentage of all Michigan districts for the same data. If we were the average district, meaning in the 50th percentile, we would be spending 10% of our budget on school, general administration, and business services. Now, while you look at that and you think, okay, 1.9%, okay, that's not a lot. But if you take 1.9% of $160 million, if we were an average district, we would be spending $3 million more a year in this area, which shows that those percentages we have chosen from a board standpoint, administrative standpoint, to shift many of those types of expenses into educating kids, which again is that larger pie chart. So from a comparison purposes, when I look at something like this, it shows me that we're putting more money into the classroom, which is what we should be doing. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight. Second thing I wanted to highlight is under page 8, under the fund balances. Typically, when you look at a large number, you see $32.4 million. And you think, wow, that's a lot of money to have in fund balance, a rainy day fund. Typically, the reason that is put into a percentage basis, meaning a percentage of expenditures, is because $32.4 million of fund balance is different for us as it is different for Mount Clemens, who has 1,000 kids. Mount Clemens had $32.4 million of fund balance on 1,000 kids. That's a huge fund balance. So typically what we do in comparison is we try to do that as a percentage of expenditures. That way, you know, on a comparative basis, how financially well the district is in relation to its size. So if you were to look at $32.4 million, if that was Utica's fund balance, obviously they have 25,000 kids, $32 million of fund balance on a $250 million budget would be different than on a $180 million budget. So I just want you to understand that so that you know that's typically why that's put into a percentage of expenditure basis, because that's the best comparative model that we can use in relation to a fund balance. So the dollar amount seems large, but when you look in the grand scale of things in comparison to our total expenditures, it's again a little bit above state average, but again not crazy out of whack with any other districts in the area. And again, the statewide average is up. For last year was almost 15%, 14.9%. So those are the two things that I wanted to mention in this presentation, because I think those are important takeaways for this. Are there any questions? Any questions of Jennifer and Kevin? All right, well, the one thing I can say is she likes to give credit to me. I'm not the one who gets credit. 99.99% of the work is done by the business office staff, not me. I just get to look and see and be proud of how they handle these types of things. And I think it says a lot to who they are to really understand this information and to come so prepared. Because I know it's almost turnkey now, it seems like, with the staff that we have. And a lot of that is having the same people involved in it year over year. So really the kudos should go to the business office staff, not me, and to Jennifer and Kevin, because they make it really seamless. So that's all I have to say. Any other questions? All right. It is 6:16, so I will call the Building and Site Subcommittee meeting to a close, and thank you, Kevin, Finance. I'm so used to Building and Site. Finance Committee meeting. Thank you, Kevin and Jennifer, and
Thank you.
we'll see you in a half hour or so.
Evening, I'd like to call to order the Chippewa Valley Schools Board of Education meeting for October 18th, 2021. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next up we have additions and deletions. There is none this evening. Moving on to C, recognition presentations. Mr. Roberts.
Sure. This evening, we have a new board member who was officially sworn in at the end of last week, but we're going to do a ceremonial swearing in of Mr. Kenneth Pearl. So, Mr. Pearl, if you could come around to the front. I'll hold the mic. Okay, Mr. Pearl, first of all, welcome to Chippewa Valley Schools. Welcome back to Chippewa Valley Schools as a board member, and let's do our swearing in. Please raise your right hand. I, Kenneth Pearl, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state.
I, Kenneth Pearl, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of member of the Board of Education of Chippewa Valley Schools according to the best of my ability.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of member of the Board of Education of the Chippewa Valley Schools according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations and welcome back to Chippewa Valley. Let's hear it for Mr. Pearl.
Okay, I believe next we have the presentation from Plant Moran.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Chambers. I'm the partner in the engagement from Plant Moran. With me tonight is Kevin Terratuta, who is the manager on the audit. We will be presenting to you tonight the results of the June 30, 2021 financial audit. Thank you to the Board of Education for having us here tonight. Before we provide an overview of the financial results, I wanted to discuss a few deliverables with you that you would have received in your board packet related to the audit. You should have received 3 items. The first is the basic financial statements, which is labeled financial report. The federal programs audit, also referred to as the single audit, and the letter entitled report to the Board of Education. As a result, relates to the first deliverable, the financial report, we have performed the audit of the district's financial statements in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America and in accordance with government auditing standards. As a result of our audit, we have issued an unmodified opinion, which is the highest form of assurance that we can provide to you that the district's financial statements are fairly presented. Also included in the financial report is a footnote describing that the district was subjected to the bond compliance requirements, and our audit procedures include evaluation of those requirements. We did not identify any compliance issues with the costs that we selected for testing under your bond program. As it relates to the second item I mentioned, the federal programs audit is a separate audit performed over the district's federal grants received. This is a compliance-based audit to evaluate whether the grants that we selected for testing comply with the federal program rules. The current year audit has elevated risks associated with the significant amount of emergency response grants that have been deployed by the federal government. As we get into the graph presentation shortly, you will be able to see the impact to the district of this increase in funding. With the increase in federal funding, there are also additional compliance requirements. And as it related to these particular new grants, a lot of those compliance requirements were developed along the way, and districts were faced with having to kind of figure it out as you went, as the guidance kind of trickled in from the state of Michigan and the federal government. I'm happy to report that we have issued unmodified opinions on the 2 grants that we selected for testing, which were 2 of the emergency response grants that the district received. We tested the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is also referred to as CRF, and the Education Stabilization Fund, which for Chippewa is predominantly the ESSER grant. There were no findings or question costs associated with complying with these requirements, which, as I mentioned, given the elevated risks, is an outstanding accomplishment. The final deliverable that I wanted to touch on briefly is the one entitled Report to the Board of Education. This outlines required post-audit communications and includes several informational items for the board's review and consideration. There have been meaningful changes in the way in which state funding will be distributed to districts, as well as additional focus and additional emergency grants, primarily ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. There is discussion in the letter to just inform you with regards to the nature of these changes in state and federal funding. I want to congratulate the district and thank Mr. Setterland and the business office staff on a successful and smooth audit. Again, this was a challenging year, and the district demonstrated a continued focus on the integrity and financial reporting, and receiving unmodified opinions with no findings is something to be proud of. I will now turn it over to Kevin, and he'll provide an overview of the financial results.
Okay, if we want to move to the next slide, please. So we'll begin this portion of the presentation in the general fund revenue for the most recent fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. So total revenue and other financing sources of the district was approximately $180.2 million. Now, of that amount, there's a little asterisk there as an annual reminder that a portion of that total revenue money, $13.1 million worth, is the retirement funding from the state that goes through the school district. So you'll see that on both the revenue and expenditure side. And that $13.1 million is not necessarily funding that the district can use at its discretion. So for total revenue, components that make that up are the state membership aid. So that largest slice of the pie you see in front of you comes from your foundation allowance at the state or your per pupil funding. That made up about 67.6%. or $121.7 million. The next grouping, if we're going clockwise around the pie, is your property taxes at $14.1 million. And then we kind of enter the next slice, which outlines in maybe a little bit more detail the impact that these new emergency relief fundings have had on the revenue sources of the district. So from a recurring level, there is a funding or federal funding source that the district typically receives for its operations in federal grant programs, for example, Title I and child nutrition. The next 2 pieces of that were those CRF funds and the ESSER funds that came through from the federal government, from the state. Those make up about $9.9 million in the current year, or about 5.5% of the total revenue sources in this current year. The next slide we look at is general fund revenue year over year. So from June of 2021 and June of 2020. So year over year, you'll notice about an approximate $20 million increase in total revenue to the district, a component of which is those emergency relief fundings that I just mentioned, but also the realization of the enhancement millage makes up a good portion of that additional funding. You'll see here in that year over year comparison how that new funding from those 2 sources have kind of impacted the overall allocation, with state membership aid kind of being reduced by 8% or so, and that being made up by that 5.5% of new relief funding and the additional enhancement millage increasing the other state, local, and intra-district sources by about 2%. So now we take a look at general fund expenditures for the year ended June 30th, 2021. Total expenditures and other financing uses of the district was approximately $177.7 million. And the pie chart in front of you kind of outlines the allocation of how those dollars are spent at the district. So 80.5% of which goes to instruction and instructional support. So that's what we like to consider those in-classroom dollars. Those are dollars spent by the district towards the education of students. Or to put another way, every dollar that the district spends, about 80 cents goes towards the education of students. We can take a look then, comparison on the next slide, year over year, the general fund expenditures and how that has changed. So from 2020 to 2021, there was approximately approximately $17 million in increased expenditures at the district. And generally speaking, year over year, the allocation of how these dollars are spent doesn't change very much. But we did want to point out that instruction and instructional support service did actually increase by about 1.5% from 2020 to 2021. So this next slide is also another comparative chart, but this time looking at the district and a statewide percentage of all Michigan districts and how that allocation of expenditures kind of compares between the two. So you'll notice that at a statewide level, that instruction and instructional support services makes up about 74% at a statewide average level, whereas at Chippewa Valley, that amount is 80.5%. Those dollars, again, being spent towards the education of students. On our next slide, as Jennifer pointed out, we take a look in a little more detail that sort of non-recurring relief funding, the amount of awards that have been granted to the district and expenditures as of the most recent fiscal year ended. So as Jennifer had mentioned, the district has received funding from coronavirus relief fund grants and then ESSER 1, 2, and 3. The ESSER 2 stabilization was state provided financing or state provided relief funds to make up a $450 per pupil kind of gap between the ESSER 2 funding originally. With the ESSER 3 funding, we also just found out pretty recently that there is $6.4 million in discretionary funds. That's not necessarily listed here on this particular chart, but that was just awarded and allocated to the district. So on the next slide, we've taken a look at revenues and expenditures. And now this slide kind of looks at the impact of fund balance. So beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2020 was approximately $30 million. The excess of revenues over expenditures for the year was approximately $2.4 million. And therefore the ending fund balance is approximately $32.4 million. Another way to look at fund balance is to consider that as a percentage of expenditures. So as of June 30th, 2021, the general fund balance as a percentage of expenditures was 18.22%. And at June 30th, 2020, that amount was 18.72%, or 18.72%. Another way of putting that is if there were no new revenue sources coming into the district and that funding just stopped, the general fund would be able to handle the operations of the school district for approximately 66.5 days. So the next two slides that you'll see kind of work in conjunction with each other. This first slide is a 10-year look back at the balance of the general fund from June 30th, 2012 through 2021. And you'll note that year over year, there's been an increase in that general fund balance. If you look at the next slide in comparison with that, we again take a look at that ratio of general fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. And over the last 6 years or so, you'll notice that that ratio has remained relatively unchanged between 17.5% and 18.5%. So although fund balance is increasing, that ratio of fund balance to expenditures has remained largely stable. The final slide we have for you is a comparison of general fund balance as compared to other Macomb County districts and the statewide average. So this data all does come from last year because that is the most recent data available to us. So as you recall, 18.72% was that general fund balance ratio as of June 2020. Again, it's 18.22% for the most current year. Statewide average was just under 15% as of June 30th, 2020. And you're kind of able to see on the chart where the other Macomb County districts kind of fell in that same ratio. This general fund balance is a great sort of comparative approach based as the districts kind of all differ in size, but it kind of brings them more into scale on how that general fund balance as a percentage of expenditures kind of plays out. And with that, that's all the information from a financial perspective we have for you today.
Actually, I wondered if we could go back real quick to slide number 7 on the COVID relief funding. I just wanted to make a comment on what is noted parenthetically, just so that you know the information that is there. So for each of the grants that are listed, the anticipated award period is presented as well. And so, while we expect that these grants will continue for the next couple of years, it is important to note that those are finite periods of time. And so that was one of the reasons that we also highlighted what the recurring component of your federal grants are versus this non-recurring component, just so you have an idea over the horizon of this period of the emergency grants. How many years could those be in effect? And then when that funding will essentially stop. So I just wanted to point that out. But we do appreciate the opportunity to present to you tonight and to serve as your auditors, and we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Board is good with your report. We appreciate the time you spent to put this together for us. And we're glad to see that the fund balance is remaining healthy. Going to be some funding challenges moving forward for sure with the student funding, as Mr. Sutherland had pointed out to us in our board package, but this is good. So much appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. Bednar,
Yeah, Mr.
might I ask a question?
Yes,
That'd be all right?
absolutely.
All right, thank you. Miss Chambers, you've been on the team that's worked with our school district for a number of years, and there were others prior to you because Plant Moran's been with us for quite a few years. Can you talk about our district just a little bit about what you see as the stability financially of our district over time, and what you see as an outside auditor that provides that stability, and where we've positioned ourselves financially? If you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And I think one of the graphs actually kind of helps show that, if it was graph number 10. So I think certainly from a metrics perspective, that percentage of fund balance as a percent of expenditures, and seeing that can remain consistent and has been consistent over a period of time. I think in the early years of the graphs that we presented, and in my experience, there was really an effort to make sure that the district was long-range planning and preparing to make sure that you had adequate resources to be able to sustain just different things that happen in our environment. The state funding was highly unstable for a long period of time. And now we've got a pandemic that we're dealing with. And so to be able to see the continuity of that percentage really speaks to just the focused effort to maintain financial stability. So that would be one aspect. think another aspect that I've observed is just with regards to the budgeting process and being part of what we look at from an audit perspective, just having a really keen understanding of the cost drivers and what plays into and understanding each of the different elements as you plan out, how are you going to expend your resources? There's really a very high level and a high degree of focus on that throughout the year. And I do think that that organization and diligence really plays into that stability factor.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Pearl? You gotta turn the box on that it's attached to. That box, yeah, yeah. Check on top.
Thank you. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of receiving these audits from Platte Moran. I don't want to tell you how many years, and how many communities. They seem to represent a lot of municipal and school agencies, government entities, but it's always nice to see the audit clean. And I appreciate the work Scott and your business office has put in, and they continued to the years that I was here before. It's no easy task to do everything right. It takes a lot of work, and it's shown by this audit, because Platte Moran does an excellent audit, and if there was a problem, they would have found it. But everybody does, really does a good job of putting it together. I've seen communities where they don't have these clean audits. So I'd like to thank Platte Moran for their work, but also our business office and Scott for all the hard work that they do every day, in addition to having to put up with the auditors during this time. They have to do their regular work too. So I did ask a few questions earlier. I was glad to see that the federal funds that we've spent so far has been one-time expenditures that we don't have to look for money to find in future years after the federal funds dry up. I believe there were a lot of computers and technology that was bought for the students. So I'm glad to see that. And thank you very much, Mr. President.
Yeah. Good. Okay, Mr. Roberts, anything else under recognition or presentations this evening?
Wait for the green light. No, that's it this evening.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to G and just a little housekeeping too. We excuse Mr. Quion for this evening's meeting, and Ms. Adlam, the start time was 6:32. Okay, moving on to item D, general consent agenda. And I have a motion for a general consent agenda.
I'll move. Go ahead.
I'll move.
By Mr. Mixak, supported by Mr. Sobel. Where we're getting our feet from. Okay, anything on the general consent agenda? Anybody like to have removed, like a question? Okay, hearing none, can we have a roll call vote? Ms. Biden, please?
Sure. Ms. Demingsack. Mr. Soba. Mr. Bednard.
Yes.
Mr. Pearl.
Yes.
Myself, yes. Mr. Vojtovich.
Yes.
Ayes all, motion carries. And we do have 3 retirements this evening.
Are any of them present? Ms. Biden, you know? Clarice?
No,
No.
none are present this evening.
Okay.
Whereas Alvin Horning, Judith Ross, and Ruth Wilson have served the Chippewa Valley School District faithfully and diligently for a period of 19 years as a bus driver, 22 years as a bus driver, and 22 years as a clerk and executive secretary respectively. Whereas Alvin Horning, Judith Ross, and Ruth Wilson, through their leadership, have had a positive impact on the staff, students, and the community. Whereas Alvin Horning, Judith Ross, and Ruth Wilson, conscientious, loyal, hardworking employees, have elected to retire. And whereas Alvin Horning, Judith Ross, and Ruth Wilson will be missed by all their school colleagues. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Chippewa Valley School District, not only on their behalf, but also that of the Superintendent of Schools and the administration, extend their thanks and appreciation for a job well done, as well as best wishes for the future. Be it further resolved that this resolution, having been adopted by the Board of Education of the Chippewa Valley School District on the 18th day of October 2021, be made a permanent part of the records of this school district, and a copy sent to Alvin Horning, Judith Ross, and Ruth Wilson as an expression of appreciation. And we certainly wish them the best.
Yes. Okay. Moving on to E, old business. There is none this evening. F, new business. F1, approve 2021 Red Ribbon Month resolution. Mr. Roberts.
Recommended motion that the Chippewa Valley Schools Board of Education approve the resolution for Chippewa Valley School District to observe October 2021 as Red Ribbon Month.
Motion, please.
So moved.
By Ms. Patton. Support.
I'll support.
Supported by Mr. Solo. Rationale, please.
October is celebrated as Red Ribbon Month across America. Red Ribbon Month is an effort to raise national awareness of youth drug use. Chippewa Valley Schools recognizes the dangers to our students of tobacco, alcohol, and other drug use. The Chippewa Valley Coalition for Youth and Families, a coalition of school parents and the community, and the Interfaith Chippewa Valley Schools Partnership, a coalition that links the school district with local churches, is working to support the drug prevention education efforts of Chippewa Valley Schools by approving the resolution. The Chippewa Valley Schools Board of Education is promoting school, parent, and community awareness of the issues of youth drug use and supporting school and community prevention efforts.
Questions or comments by the board? Seeing none, a roll call vote. Ms. Patton, please.
Myself, yes. Mr. Soba,
Yes.
Mr. Bednard,
Yes.
Ms. Demink Zek,
Yes.
Mr. Pearl,
Yes.
Mr. Vojtovich.
Yes.
Ayes all, motion carries.
Mr. Bednar, I'd like to read the resolution if you do not mind.
Please do.
The Red Ribbon Month, Substance Abuse Prevention Month. This is a resolution. Whereas youth use of alcohol, marijuana, and other drugs, vaping, and prescription drug abuse is a serious problem across our nation. Whereas October 2021 is Red Ribbon Month, a national celebration to promote a drug-free America. Whereas Chippewa Valley Schools recognizes that the combined efforts of parents, students, school, and community are needed to address the alcohol, marijuana, vaping, other drug use, and prescription drug abuse of our students. Whereas the Chippewa Valley Coalition for Youth and Families, a school community coalition, is working to support Chippewa Valley Schools' ongoing drug prevention efforts. Therefore, be it resolved that October 2021 will be celebrated in Chippewa Valley Schools as Red Ribbon Month. Red Ribbon Month will be dedicated to educating our students, staff, parents, and community about the dangers of youth use of alcohol, marijuana, vaping, other drugs, and prescription drug abuse, and to promote safe, healthy, and drug-free youth. Be it further resolved that this resolution, having been adopted by the Chippewa Valley Board of Education on October 18th, 2021, be announced to the public and be made a permanent part of the records of the Chippewa Valley Board of Education.
Thank you. All right, moving on to F2, approve change order summary report, September 2021. Mr. Selman.
The recommended motions that the Chippewa Valley Schools Board of Education approve the 2018 bond issue change order summary report for the month of September 2021.
Motion, please. Moved by Demink Zek,
Support.
Supported by Mr. Silva. Rationale, please.
This work consists of changes to existing contracts for the purpose of owner requested work, deducts, code compliance, or hidden conditions on the construction and equipment projects. All amounts are within the contingency budget allocation. This report was reviewed with the Building and Site Subcommittee on Monday, October 4th, 2021, and funding will come from the 2018 Building and Site Fund.
Questions or comments by the board? Here's something I'd point out, maybe would be interesting, is that at this point, 48% of the projects have been completed on the bond program. And we have 87% of our contingency balance remaining still. So doing a real nice job and not overrunning these projects, especially with the shortage of help and whatnot these days. So they did a nice job on that to stay in budget. And we're gonna need to make that money last a long time. So, okay. With that, we will move on to G.
Mr.
From-
Bednard, we need to take a vote.
Yes. Got talking. Got it. Roll call vote, Ms. Biden, please.
Ms. Demink Zek,
Yes.
Mr. Soba,
Yes.
Mr. Bednard,
Yes.
Mr. Pearl,
Yes.
myself, yes, Mr. Vojtovich,
Yes.
eyes all, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to G from the community. Number of community members would like to address the board this evening. As always, we'll just read the board rules before we start. Public participation shall be permitted as indicated on the order of business. Attendees must register their intention to participate upon their arrival. Each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 5 minutes duration. We'll give you the friendly 1 minute reminder. Participants shall direct all comments to the board and not to staff and other participants. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer. No person may address or question board members individually. Complaints against identifiable school personnel may not be expressed in an open meeting. Such complaints should first be submitted in writing to the board and aired in open or closed session according to the wish of the persons involved. The presiding officer may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement when the statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, obscene, or irrelevant. Request any individual to leave the meeting when that person does not observe reasonable decorum. Request the assistance of law enforcement and the removal of disorderly person when the person's conduct interferes with the orderly progress of the meeting. Call for a recess or an adjournment to another time when the lack of public decorum so interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting as to warrant such action. Waive these rules with the approval of the board when necessary for protection of privacy or the administration of the board's business. Okay. All right, so tonight we will begin our community comment with Mr. Dan St. Laurent. Mr. St. Laurent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As mentioned, my third time speaking here, my wife and I are both public school teachers in Macomb County. All 4 of our kids, or 3 of our 4 kids so far, have been through the SAC program at Shawnee, where they've been able to attend with their friends in a familiar setting. We have students at Seneca, Shawnee, and Little Turtle, and the staff have been instrumental in our children's growth. We completely trust them with our kids. The staff at Little Turtle have almost become extra favorite aunts to our little 2-year-old. On March 10th, 2020, 588 days ago, the voters of Macomb County and Chippewa Valley Schools passed an enhancement millage. Per the Macomb for Kids website, macombforkids.com, their frequently asked questions section makes a couple of interesting points. One point is the money raised by a millage can be spent on whatever priorities a local community chooses, giving them local control and the ability to make decisions based on the needs of its children and schools. There are 2 questions asked with answers provided. One question, how will school districts be held accountable for this proposal? And the answer provided was, By law, every penny generated from this proposal will be distributed to local school districts to maintain existing programs and improve the services offered to students. Another question on their frequently asked questions section is, will taxpayers have any say in how this money is spent? The answer, the best way for taxpayers to have a continued impact on school spending decisions, whether it be the school's current budget or any additional revenue generated by this millage, is to get fully behind school board candidates who represent your viewpoints on education and funding issues, as well as attending your local school board meetings so you can be heard. According to the February 21st, 2020 edition of the CNG newspaper, it stated that over $400 per student would be generated per this millage. As stated many times in board meetings, there are about 15,000 students in Chippewa Valley schools. This is essentially found money that will continue for roughly a decade. SAC is an existing program. It's a legitimate and expected school service. SAC was last offered at Shawnee on March 13th, 2020. SAC has not been offered at Shawnee for the last 585 days. Chippewa Valley Schools has had a year and a half to fix this problem. This existing program is not being maintained. There have been 585 days of financial savings by not offering SAC at Shawnee. Is it possible that these savings plus the millage could be used to attract appropriate staffing at Shawnee and retain current staff? About 3.5 hours ago, my wife received a phone call about a possible solution on the horizon, which we are happy about, but this horizon could be weeks away. So I decided to speak today with my proposed remarks regardless, because what I say might apply to other parents and other situations. If SAC is to not be available in the future, more notice would be appreciated by parents. This year, we were told 1 week before school started that there would not be SAC. Last school year, we were told 2 days before. If bad news is to be provided, more notice would be beneficial. For the last few days, I've been teaching my high school students about the First Amendment. I'm a civics and history teacher. It's actually a fun topic and my students are pretty engaged. This Wednesday, we will be discussing the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. There is no better way to teach our students than to put our words into action. In that same spirit, I also teach my students, and my wife and I also teach our own kids to speak out on things that we approve of and when things are going well. Masking is a choice to be made by parents and guardians for their children. The choice to mask or not should be respected by all stakeholders in the Chippewa Valley Schools community. So once again, thank you for keeping masking optional. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. St. Lawrence, for your comments this evening. Okay, next up we have Jessica St. Lawrence. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I was happily surprised to receive a phone call from Shawnee today to indicate that a SAC director is in the works. My only gripe is that the phone call came after I had written my original board meeting speech. That having been said, my speech will be taking a different direction tonight. So thank you for working on restoring SAC at Shawnee. I realize that this is still a work in progress, but please do realize that the additional stress and inconvenience this has put on working families. My husband and I will still continue to be a visible, vocal presence at school board meetings in hopes that we see follow through. We do not want and will not allow a precedence of no childcare at Shawnee to be set, as it has the past 2 school years. Should the district find itself in this awful situation again, please remember that Shawnee Elementary is your largest elementary school. Shawnee families have backed the burden of no childcare for over a year and a half. While no family should have to endure what we have had to, the district would need to strongly consider having a multi-site license or putting another school in the rotation of an alternate childcare site. Should you be in this position again, and I hope that you will not be. I hope that this will never be the case again, but at the same time, Shawnee families have had enough. It is someone else's turn. Just for some perspective on multi-site childcare arrangements, if I need to make a last-minute change to one of my boys' schedules, I'm to first log on to the LEO portal, then contact 2 separate classroom teachers, contact 2 Ojibwa secretaries, Contact 2 Shawnee secretaries and also contact the Ojibwa SAC director. This is not a workable, feasible plan. Not to mention the fact that Ojibwa SAC is the very reason why my 4th grader was not selected to perform morning service squad duties this fall. The lack of a district solution from the get-go unfortunately cost our Shawnee children opportunities that would have been available had SAC been offered on site. Moving forward, I beg of the board to please not give last-minute notice like now what has marked 2 years in a row. We were told mere days before school starting that no childcare was being made available on site. This was and is unacceptable. Last-minute notice only intensifies parents' anxiety as they scramble for childcare and also deepens children's anxiety when everyone touts that they care about children's social emotional growth. The district should have communicated that there was no plan in place, giving families ample opportunity to plan, not scrambling at the last minute. Ask any family what they would have chosen. Bad news with sufficient notice over what we were given, and I promise they would have chosen the former. When I speak to the board, I often reference the abundance of generous state, federal, and local funding that school districts have received since March of 2020. Please keep in mind that the millage was passed to enhance services, not consolidate, not omit, enhance. True, there may be a national labor shortage, but people can and want to work if the money is right. Your current employees can and want to work, some of them taking on multiple sites and jobs, all while doing so with grace, class, and a smile. For that, we appreciate your current employees who have influenced and inspired our 4 children. Please reward them generously for their hard work. You have the funds to do so. Many of your very best employees work at Little Turtle, Shawnee, and Ojibwa, some not receiving benefits while also holding a second job. These positions are both tireless and thankless. We are forever indebted to each of these individuals, as I hope you are as well. Again, we thank you for your time and are cautiously optimistic that things will be moving forward in the right direction to provide consistency and stability for Shawnee families. On a separate note, I hope that you continue to leave masking optional for students. Parents know what is best for their children and families. That having been said, SAC at Shawnee and optional masking is what is best for our children and our family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. St. Laurent, for your comments this evening. Okay, next up, I have Rita Zielinski. Zielinski.
So what a difference a few weeks make. Social media, YouTube agencies, sites are censoring more than ever. The federal government wants our bank accounts tracked. The National School Board Association has asked the federal government to put a task force in place against parents at school board meetings claiming we are harassing, threatening, and assaulting members. Interviews, fines, arrests, and jail. 17 state boards of education have now distanced themselves from the National School Board Association. Why? Because it's another attempt to infringe upon our rights as parents and silence us. So as you sit as our representatives and our elected board members to make the best decisions for our district and more importantly for each child in it, you have to ask yourselves literally, what in the world is going on? Or where is all of this going? Or what does normal look like if we're ever going to get back to it? We have a vaccine mandate by a president with no EO signed, no law passed, no OSHA changes, that stands on the basis of a press release and corporations enforcing it. People are losing livelihoods and education over not getting an experimental medicine with ingredients never before given to humans, and that clearly is not stopping the virus. Congress and its staff are exempt from a vaccine mandate, and over 100 members have been treated with ivermectin, a medicine that's banned from people. There are a lot of people passing away right now, a lot of them that were fully vaccinated, and they're not passing from COVID. Yet the number of vaccine deaths and adverse reactions are not being reported, and the information is being censored. And masks are still being enforced on buses in many districts when reports continuously show no protection and great harm. And the media is spinning this information as fast as possible. So what if there was corruption and this administration was selected and not elected? What if their agenda was to destroy America? What would that look like? Maybe open borders, blending our country and gaining potential voters, removing history and indoctrinating our children, creating and maintaining division with race wars, destroying the military, police, and hospitals, creating and maintaining product and food shortages, creating chaos in the streets and keeping people in fear, silencing anyone that goes against the narrative, releasing a bioweapon to destroy economies while withholding medicines that could save lives, masking people to keep fear levels up and demoralize the people. See, history tells us that all of these tactics have been used before to overthrow a population. So a quick reminder to 2020, when COVID was a greater threat, we had vaccine choice, more freedom, better, stronger economy, less shortages, energy, no inflation, no big taxes coming, and on the brink of world peace. So as we keep showing up to speak out against mass quarantine, testing, data collecting, CRT, vaccine endorsing, and upcoming mandates, this board needs to know that the attempt to silence or scare the parents by this administration may have temporarily quieted a few, but has awakened many, many more. And the tide is finally turning. The people are rising. The last meeting I mentioned, 39 states petitioned a writ of mandamus against their governor. That number is now 48 states. Federal suits have been filed in the districts against districts and boards of education in almost 48 states as well. Class actions are getting started against corporations, vaccine companies, government agencies, including the health departments. Our constitutional rights have been trampled on, and the country's consequences of complying will be reined in soon as we go forward. I agree that it had to be this way for people to wake up and show moving forward which side every elected person sits, part of the problem or part of the solution. So if anyone that's listening is lost, you should turn off your mainstream media and find the real news. I will end with a serious question. I recently watched the movie 1984. I asked my husband about halfway through it, as he had read the book years before, please tell me, does this end well? And he had no response. So for anyone who knows of 1984, my question is this the world that we're approaching, or have we been in this world for decades and are starting to remember the bits of the past? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Linsky, for your comments this evening. Okay, next up, Michelle Bocano. Michelle. Hi, welcome.
Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I still appreciate the option to be wear a mask or not wear a mask. It's been a big difference on my child not to wear a mask. I seen something disturbing on social media that there's people that are wanting you guys to make a mask mandate. I'm asking you, please, let it be parents' choice. My daughter wears a mask. She gets severe bloody noses. I live in the United States. You've mentioned the Constitution. That backs me. My rights back me. And I've even started talking to my 7-year-old. You have constitutional rights. You have rights. And if you don't want to wear the mask, don't wear the mask. And I am praying, I pray for you guys every night that you guys keep it optional. Because if the mask mandate comes back, I'm not sending my child to school with the mask. We have rights, we have freedoms. The masks don't do anything. I have left my job because of the mask mandate, which gives me more time to fight for my child. So thank you, and I appreciate you guys, and I hope you really keep it choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bocano, for your comments this evening. Okay, next up, Laura Cabarrios. Sorry, Laura. Hi, Laura. Welcome.
Hello. For the school year for 1920, we were able to raise funds for our students to be able to go on big trips. I'm a parent of a choir student, and that year we were planning a trip for the choir to go to New York, which was canceled due to COVID. So the funds that were raised for each of the students planning to go on that trip, we're now being told are going into a general fund. We're very frustrated by this because we didn't have any opportunity to speak about how these funds could be used. We didn't have any say. We weren't even barely told, other than here we are wondering, what we can do with this, with these funds that each of us raised. And students have accounts ranging from $300 to over $1,000 that were raised for these trips. You likely know that Dakota has a new choir director who is apparently attempting to create a trip that the students may go on. But you have 2 years of choir students who've actually graduated, couldn't go on that trip. And my student in particular, who was a sophomore at the time, is now a senior and would not be able to take that trip this year in the spring, as we have other spring plans. I'm just simply asking that the board not take these funds and put them into the general fund, and that each of these accounts be able to be utilized for the students' individual fees. For choir, for instance, we have a $100 fee for show choir. We have a $50 costume fee. The money can stay within the choir account, but instead of going into the general fund for all students, we're simply asking, couldn't those funds be applied to our individual students' expenses? This is how it used to be, obviously, as you all know, in our district for many years. I understand that it was changed so that we could only apply funds to a trip. Our trip was canceled due to extenuating circumstances. We raised that money under those rules for it to be for a trip. The money is from our family, our friends, our hours working booster. It's our money. We simply want it to be able to be applied to our own students' accounts. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cabarrus, for your comments this evening. Okay, next, Mr. Lewis Miles. Hello and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take a couple minutes to express my displeasure, but more so than that, the reasoning for my displeasure with the recent selection of the current board position. There's been a lot of talk that, on the board it's for the kids first. It's always kids first. There were some great, outstanding candidates that applied and were interviewed that were passed over. And the gentleman that was selected is not a parent of a child in the district. Now, I heard a lot of board members say being a parent doesn't matter. Having kids in the district doesn't matter. Well, it kind of does matter, right? And the reason behind that, if you are a IT guy, right? Or a computer programmer 20 years ago, and you served your company well, you got out of that, you spent some time doing this, that, and the other thing. And then you come back some 15 years later to the current day to do that same job. You would be lost. Times change, technology changes, everything changes. So with someone that does not have kids in the district, how are you to know what these kids in these schools, some 15,000 students, are facing in today's day and age? How do you know? As a parent, you know. You talk to your children every day. How was school? What'd you do? What'd you learn? If you have no kids in the district, you don't have that luxury. You don't have that option. So how do you know? This is about kids first. No disrespect to this man. I don't even know him. But to be a parent in this district, you should, I don't want to say you should, but it means a lot more to me to be a member of the school board when you are a parent in the community. I don't understand how someone that's not a parent could be a better fit for this board that's all about kids first than some of the people that applied and were interviewed for that position. I don't understand that. I can't understand that. It makes absolutely no sense to me how a man that has no idea of what goes on in these schools today could be a better selection than someone that has 3 kids in the district or 5 kids in the district or even 1 child in the district. Maybe someday when we have a question and answer period, if that ever happens, maybe someone can explain that to me, because I would love to hear that explanation. How does that work? As a parent, the first thing you think of is your kids. The first thing you do is, what do I have to do to make sure that my kids have the best possible chance to be the best people they can be, to put their best foot forward? What do I have to do? Do I have to sacrifice? Do I have to give this up? Do I have to give that up? It doesn't matter. Whatever it takes, you do. And that's your first thought as a parent. If you're not a parent, well, you know, maybe you're a guy that's a developer. You're thinking, hey, what's the next deal I can make to get this done? What's the next deal I can make to get that done? This isn't about deals.
1 minute. I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's not about deals. It's about doing what's best for the kids in this district, not the teachers in this district, not anybody else in this district, the kids in this district. Now, I'm not saying that I don't respect the teachers. I respect the hell out of all the teachers in this district. It is a thankless job to be a school teacher. But again, that's the path that they chose. So I wanted to express my extreme displeasure in the way that that whole selection took place, because I can't be alone in thinking that that gentleman was the best selection for this board. I refuse to believe that. There's got to be other people that think that a parent is better than someone that's not. Maybe there's not, maybe I'm just off the wall, but that's just my thoughts. I wanted to express my thoughts, and as my right, I figured I would do that tonight. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Smiles, for your comments this evening. Next up, Michelle Fusco. Michelle. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. In the spring of 2020, our choir kids raised money for an exciting trip to Broadway. The kids worked really hard to raise money, and parents worked really hard to help pay for the trip through booster volunteerships. The trip, of course, was canceled, which was really disappointing. Part of the money was non-refundable, which was really disappointing. We didn't have an opportunity to have a trip last year, which was disappointing. And now we're being told if the money is not used for a trip this year, it will go to the choir general fund, which is unacceptable. And we've been offered no explanation as to why that would occur. Right now, there is no trip planned. We have a new choir director, as was mentioned. The seniors already have senior trips planned for this spring, and if a trip is planned at the last minute, they most likely would not be able to take advantage of that. The state of Michigan does allow individual funds, if clearly stated, which it was. Individual funds benefit more kids to take advantage of the programs that are offered by our programs. All of these funds are accounted for on the district's PTO manager software, which is very visible and very transparent. This is not the district's money. We're talking about $22,000 to $25,000 of money that was raised by kids and parents that you want to take away and give to the general choir fund with no shared plans or intentions of what that money would be used for. We weren't asked for input as to how those funds would be used. We weren't really informed of any of these changes. They seem to have been arbitrarily made to us. This is how it seems to us by the business office. Changes that affect students and families without any consideration to how that's going to affect us. The new policies don't seem to value volunteers and boosters, and we've already seen a big shortage in the number of boosters because of the new policies that you put in place. There's no way that this money should be taken away from the kids who have already faced so much disappointment. It's really wrong. Historically, it was up to the group organizer as to how the funds could be used, and they were able to be used for show choir fees, musical fees, tickets to concerts, choir gear. And I think that our treasurer has tried to work with the business office to find a resolution like that to no avail so far. So we wanted to take the time tonight to come and bring this to your attention. And I hope that you will agree with us that it's just not fair and very disappointing to the kids and the parents who worked so hard to raise those funds. And especially for this year, I think there should be some consideration for, grandfathering in for the kids who were affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fusco, for your comments this evening. Okay, next up we have Carmen Morari. Carmen? Hello and welcome.
Hello, my name is Carmen and I am a Chippewa Valley High School student in 10th grade. The room that you are all sitting in right now is a room that I frequently visit. I am a very good student. I take AP and honors classes and receive good grades in them. I play bassoon and band. I'm on the yearbook staff and I'm highly involved in other extracurricular activities such as CTC, marching band, and tech crew. I'm highly involved in the school and I am hyper aware of what happens within it. First off, I want to thank you all for keeping masks optional. It was a choice that many students like myself and families have been very happy to hear about. However, one thing in particular really disturbs me and my twin sister, the quarantines. As the school year passes, more and more kids are sent home in the middle of the day and won't be able to return until 2 weeks pass or they return with a negative COVID test. Today alone, I witnessed 5 kids get sent home in my classes for quarantines. Some of them were my very good friends. Almost every single kid who has been sent home gets very upset as the hall monitors bring the bad news. I get extremely fearful myself whenever a hall monitor enters, afraid that they will tell me the infamous words, "Carmen, pack up all your belongings and come to the office." I've been quarantined before. It's a terrible experience. Last year in the spring, I was called out of school for a quarantine. I cried in the car going home, knowing that I would not be able to do well with school during the time. The next couple of weeks were the hardest of my life, trying to learn through a tiny screen, attempting to keep up with my class, and trying to understand the teacher with faulty microphones. Many assignments given by all my teachers were nearly impossible to do at home. The computer systems and softwares that we had to use had many errors and difficulties. And it was very difficult to get a hold of the teachers to ask questions. This was especially terrible when assignments were due at the end of the hour and I couldn't ask the teacher for any help on completing the assignments. My grades also began to slip. This was especially frustrating since I knew that my grade would be much higher if I had remained in person at school. During quarantine, I never developed symptoms or tested positive for COVID. Many of my friends and classmates have had similar experiences with the live streaming. A friend of mine who was in most of my classes was quarantined. She did not have COVID, nor did she ever develop symptoms of any kind. She returned from a 2-week quarantine today. I know that she is a great student and I know that she attended all the live streams. However, I noticed that she struggled very hard to get caught up with the rest of the class, even though she attended the live streams with the new cameras and setups. She still fell behind. Many of my other friends have had similar experiences. Quarantines aren't just affecting schoolwork either. They're affecting larger issues. For example, my senior editor-in-chief on the yearbook staff has been quarantined 3 times since the beginning of the year. This has caused the rest of the yearbook staff to become very behind on the yearbook. It's stressing us out. I know the senior editor-in-chief very well. She never got sick or developed symptoms during any of her quarantines. In fact, no one I know who has ever been quarantined has ever developed symptoms during it. There have hardly been any real COVID cases in the school. Most of the people out of school are healthy when they're quarantined, and they stay healthy when they're quarantined. Out of the kids who are quarantined, almost none of them develop symptoms from COVID. Why are you sending home healthy kids? It simply makes no sense. The current live streaming system does not work. Most kids I know are terrified they'll be sent home. The lack of kids present in the classroom is also hindering other projects. Quarantines need to stop. The chance of a child under 18 dying of the flu is much higher than a child dying of under 18 dying from COVID. The flu is more dangerous to schools, but there have never been quarantines for it. So why are we quarantining now? All throughout school, since kindergarten, teachers have taught students like myself that they have a voice and they can use it to make changes. I stand here before you to use that voice that you have told me I have. So please listen to me. Listen to a student who goes to this school and has experienced these quarantines and their effects firsthand. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Morari, for your comments this evening. Okay, next up we have Karina Michelle Morari. I hope I'm saying your name right. Hello and welcome.
Hi, I don't think I'll be able to speak as well as my sister, but I'll try. Okay. I've come to talk about quarantines as well. Like my sister mentioned before, we have both seen 5 kids get quarantined today, and they were all healthy and they were not showing any COVID symptoms. I've been talking to a lot of kids who have come back from quarantines, and they all say they never got symptoms, and that trying to do school online was a nightmare. They could not communicate with the teacher because the teacher was teaching a class. They said the video image of the classroom was mirrored, so like literally mirrored, like they would look and the whole thing would be backwards, and they couldn't read anything on the board. It was bad. Kids also felt confused about what needed to be turned in, all while they never developed any fevers or anything else COVID related. Why are you quarantining healthy kids? And why are you waiting so long to send them away? I know this one girl who was good friends with a girl who tested positive, and they didn't quarantine her until 9 days after the other girl was tested positive. At that point, if she hadn't been showing symptoms, why did she still get quarantined for another 10 days? I understand the need to quarantine, but really, I understand why there's concern. But earlier today, I saw a letter in my kindergarten sister's folder saying that there was a case of pink eye. And it was just a letter, like they're not going to quarantine the whole class. It was just a letter saying, oh, that there's been a case of pink eye, so watch out for that. So pink eye is also pretty contagious, and I'm not going to compare pink eye to COVID because they're two very different illnesses, and it wouldn't be fair to do so, but it's still a contagious disease along with COVID. So what I'm asking is, why are you not quarantining pink eye, but you are quarantining COVID? It just doesn't make sense. You could do the same thing as you do with pink eye, just send a letter home and just keep an eye on the students. If they start developing symptoms, then you can quarantine them. But other than that, they're just healthy and they just want to come here to learn. And yeah. I have also heard a rumor. I don't know if it's true or not yet, but I heard it today. I'm just going to mention it because it could become a problem in the future. But there was apparently an incident in the 9th grade center where a kid tested positive and got about 5 kids quarantined. When they all came back, the 5 kids were pretty mad about it. And so they started bullying the kid that tested that got them all quarantined. I don't know if it's true yet, so don't quote me on it. But I've also seen a bunch of kids with anxiety, depression, paranoia. They're scared that they're going to be quarantined. They're scared that, like me, they're scared that we're going to be taken out of the room and told we have to go home and that we have to try to use the computers. The problem with that is it just hasn't been fully put together yet. Like there's, like how I said, it has a mirrored image. Live streaming isn't all helpful because you can watch the teacher, but you can't ask questions. The teacher has to teach a class and not worry about like the one kid who's online. And yeah, I'm just asking if we could make the quarantining a little less strict and make it less, oh, you were next to somebody who had COVID 2 days ago. Okay, you're gonna go home now. It should be more like the way that you handle pink eye or the flu, just by sending a letter and then letting people know if you develop symptoms, you should stay home, but not telling a healthy kid who hasn't had any symptoms, you need to go home because 2 days ago, somebody was sitting next to you who had COVID and you were only with them for like 15 minutes. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Maury, for your comments this evening. Your last one here, Ms. Jennifer Maury. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Hello and welcome.
Hello, good evening. I would talk about quarantines, but I think my daughters did a pretty good job of it, so I can talk about something else tonight. So I am a mother of 4 kids who attend the Chippewa Valley schools. They're having a better experience this year with not being forced to wear masks and being able to attend a school dance and sporting events. So hopefully this lean toward more freedom will continue. So today I wanted to speak regarding the National School Board Association, NSBA for short, assertion that parents who are standing up and opposing school boards should be considered domestic terrorists. The NSBA listed incidences taken completely out of context of how school board administrators and teachers are now being attacked and threatened with violence. Because of this, they requested and received support from the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland to allow FBI, Postal Service, and Homeland Security to investigate and pursue parents using, among other things, the Patriot Act. 99.99% of parents who stand up in meetings are respectful and law-abiding. The few who get out of hand are easily contained by local law enforcement if necessary. Why then, I ask, is the FBI, Postal Service, and Homeland Security needed? The answer is simple: intimidation. We who are speaking truth are getting noticed, but rather than argue or debate, the NSBA prefers to silence and intimidate their opposition. So I have a few questions to ask, and I believe as a taxpaying citizen that I have the right to receive an answer. Number one, does the Chippewa Valley School Board belong to the NSBA? You can feel free to answer if you like now or later. Do our taxpayer dollars fund your membership to the NSBA? Will the Chippewa Valley School Board officially denounce the NSBA for their attempt to silence and intimidate parents? If you're not able to answer today, I expect an answer by the next board meeting. I will also email these questions to each board member. As I've mentioned before, this board is in dire need of more transparency and two-way communication with community members. We appreciate the ability to come to the board and speak during meetings like this, but the quiet blank stares are getting old. We need a forum where questions can be asked and answered publicly. Will you commit to creating this forum? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray, for your comments this evening. And that'll conclude our community comments this evening. Thank you, everybody, for spending your time sharing what's important to you with our board. We'll move on to H, union communication. Any union leadership that'd like to speak to the board this evening? Seeing none, hearing none. Move on to I, administration reports.
Thank you, Mr. Bednard. I do have a few things we'd like to talk about tonight. First, I'd like to recognize our retirees this evening, Alvin Hornung and Judy Ross from Transportation with 19 and 22 years respectively. As our community knows, as I've expressed to them and has been expressed by Dr. Blanchard in these meetings, we are working hard to fill a lot of openings, as are our other districts in the state of Michigan across the country. And so to lose 2 bus drivers, it's really difficult. We need those bus drivers. And we're trying to attract them. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Blanchard and talk about a recent event. And we have a little video to show.
Good evening, Superintendent Roberts, Board of Education. Yeah, so this Saturday, we're actually going to be running an event. We're sponsoring an event trying to attract bus drivers. So we're going to be letting folks from the community, even if you have to have a driver's license, but if you don't have your CDL, we're going to let you cautiously drive a bus. So I know some of our people in the community, maybe our police liaison officers, would love to get behind the wheel of one of our giant yellow buses to see if they might like it. And that's really the goal here. We typically, in these situations where we're trying to recruit drivers, we're looking for those that already have a CDL that can go through some minor training and be on the road in a short period of time. We do know that across the country, there's there's a shortage of workers. This is true in transportation. We know this is a fact in not only in this area, but like I said, across the nation. So one of our tactics is going to be to try to recruit those that maybe don't have their CDL. So that's really the focus of the event. Those people that might be interested in driving a bus, have never really gotten behind a wheel of a bus, maybe a little fearful of getting behind a bus. So we're going to allow them an opportunity to test drive a bus and go through the process on site of filling out an application and beginning that process of training, and hopefully with the goal at the end of being a bus driver for Chippewa Valley Schools. That's our target, that's our goal. And we have some things kind of surrounding it to make it a family event. So hopefully, kind of like a open house for the firefighters. It's kind of a similar concept, and that's what we have planned for this Saturday. So I think at this point we can roll the video, and if there's any questions, I can answer at that point.
Most of us have ridden a big yellow school bus, but have you been behind the wheel? Here's your big chance. Chippewa Valley Schools is holding a test drive and hiring event on October 23rd to find new drivers. Bring your family down for bounce houses, activities, food, and fun, and the opportunity to test drive a bus and apply for paid driver training. No experience is needed. Just head to the administration building at 19120 Cass Avenue between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Get on your way to a great new career with Chippewa Valley Schools.
So that's our promo video featuring Superintendent Roberts. And you know, I just want to give a shout out to our transportation department. Our bus drivers are running double and triple routes. And I appreciate our families for being patient as we navigate not only driving shortages, but also an extreme amount of construction and traffic in the area. But our bus drivers really have they've attempted to weather this storm. And there have been a lot of days where we've been concerned where how are we going to get our students and transport our students, and our drivers have stepped up to the occasion and done it with smiles on their face. As we all know, they are oftentimes the first face that one of our students sees in the morning, and usually the last face that they see leaving that bus, and they are important to us. And we love for our community that hasn't driven a bus, or maybe they've thought about it, to come out and get behind the wheel and drive the bus around in the parking lot, see if they could like it. And again, that's going to be this Saturday.
Is there, I know there's a bounce house. Is there a food truck?
No food truck, Superintendent Roberts, but I believe I will be behind the grill. I haven't asked Mr. Sutherland yet to join me. I'm kind of hoping that he will join me behind the grill, but we're going to be grilling hot dogs and hamburgers. We'll have some treats and things like that. We'll have, just some fun activities for kids. So again, the idea here is that it is a community type event. We're inviting our drivers to be present too, to just kind of give them a little bit of a thank you as well for the hard work that they're doing for the district. But no food truck, but there will be food.
Okay. And what time is that on Saturday?
It's 10 to 2. So 10 a.m. to 2, and come at any point. We're going to have cider and donuts in the morning. And then about 11 to 11:30, we're going to be serving lunch.
All right.
And you can drive a bus at any point, but don't just end there. After you drive the bus, fill out the application, not you personally, Superintendent Roberts, but for the community.
I asked to film my portion behind the wheel of a bus, and they wouldn't let me. Any board members have any questions about that? I mean, I just applaud our HR department for reaching out, and I mean, we've held job fairs this year where we hired a number of people, and now doing this, and so I just applaud them for their extra efforts to fill vacancies. Questions? Okay. I just want to recognize one other retiree is Ruth Wilson, who's an executive secretary in the Human Resources Department after 22 years. Ruth is phenomenal. She coordinates our substitute teachers on a daily basis. She's up very early. She takes much pride in her job, and when she doesn't have a high percentage fill rate, she feels bad. And she's faced the last couple of years where she's going to feel bad because we don't have a lot of substitute teachers. But that's another story. But Ruth's a wonderful employee, and she certainly will be missed. Okay, one of the things I present on each week here is give a little COVID update. So we have a little PowerPoint here, and I just want to review where we are with this. It's an important part of our district. Unfortunately, I hope we'd been a little bit beyond this, but we're not quite there yet. So if we can go to the next one, I always start with how COVID seems to be in the community, and that's some numbers. So there we go. You can see here the numbers across the top: Clinton Township cases, below that Macomb Township cases. They've steadily risen since the summer. We're halfway through October, a little bit more than halfway through October, and you can compare where we are in October with September. So if the trend continues, we'll surpass September with October's numbers. And I give these numbers because what happens in the community tends to happen in our schools. And just keep in mind that we're not the only school district in Clinton Township, nor are we the only school district in Macomb Township, but we are the largest school district in each of those townships. You can see below that the Macomb County numbers on 7-day rolling averages with cases, where we started on September 7th and where we were on October 17th with a rolling average of 294 cases daily over a 1-week period in Macomb County. That number is actually a little bit lower than previous. It was up to 311. So the trend kind of bounces around a little bit, as does positivity rate. So if we move forward with this, you know, we've always said, well, that slide surprised me, but that's okay. We did do a vaccine booster clinic this week. And you can see we had 200 participants. A lot of booster shots were given, as well as flu shots were given. So we're trying to get it out there that being vaccinated is a good thing, especially, I mean, for those people who choose to do that, but it does also impact our schools. And it's helpful even with quarantines when we have people who are vaccinated. Now let's go into some numbers. And you can see here, and here's the cases at elementary through the week of 10/10. So we started on 9/13, was actually in the summer, or I'm sorry, just the beginning of the school year. And you can see cases have steadily increased, and as have quarantines, except for with the new quarantine guidelines, the actual quarantine for the week of 10/10 were only 14 students, 11 cases at elementary school. So, and I think I talk a little bit about the guidelines later on. And then we go to middle school numbers here. And here we are with middle school numbers. Same thing. Middle school has kind of held steady throughout this whole school year. And our quarantine numbers have not been exorbitant. I understand fully well any student with COVID is not a good thing, as is any student who's being quarantined. But when we're dealing with this situation and you consider things on a percentage basis, these are pretty low percentages of students that are being impacted. And again, none of this is good. And when I say that, it's not to insinuate that, oh, this is okay. We would prefer to have 0 cases of quarantine and resulting 0 students quarantined. But again, when you get down to this last week of week 10/11 with 60 students quarantined, that's because of quarantine guidelines have changed over time. When we go to high school numbers, high school numbers are higher. And remember, there are more students in high school than in middle school. It's 4 grades, not 3 grades. And high school kids are definitely more social, so you're going to have more spread. So you can see here, though, we worked up to the week of 10/11 with 61 cases and 171 students quarantined during that week. So that's just some of the, you know, what we're dealing with. It's we have 2 full-time nurses who work on this and spend a lot of time on phone calls and contact tracing. We did see a little increase after homecoming at one of our high schools, and we're just still monitoring at the other high school. There was a lot of social activity surrounding those events. Now we can move forward. Yes, yes. Yeah, I should have said that. Yeah, the numbers on the handout you have here, the number is different because the number on yours includes middle school where it says 231. I'm sorry, I caught that and corrected it today, and I was going to tell you on yours it would be different because there were 60 middle school students quarantined, 171 high school students. So that's where we are with that. So if we could move forward here, please. And there we go. So there's our update. I want to talk about quarantine guidelines, and I did the last time I talked about this. In working with the Macomb County Health Department, guidelines were changed. And I've mentioned this to the board also before, that it used to be within 6 feet, you were quarantined if you were for 15 minutes of total exposure over a 24-hour period. Within 6 feet, you would be quarantined. It's now down to 3 feet. But parents of students who are between that 3 and 6 foot range are notified, and those parents can make the choice of whether they want their children to quarantine. We also have new ways of keeping kids in school. And one of those ways, we can shorten the quarantine by taking a test on day 5 and then returning to, assuming it's negative, return to school after day 7. And then we also have something which we're trying to implement, which is a real struggle, a struggle not of our making, and that is you can test every day over 7 days and stay in school and do the rapid test, which some of the comments I heard this evening, I think would be something some students would want to do in order to stay in school. And it's the rapid test, which is not quite as invasive with that swab. And but the problem is that rapid test all of a sudden you can't find. So we have the state guideline and we're working on that. I mean, I put it in order with the state the other day, and the ISD then tries to procure those tests for us so that we can establish a testing program within our district. We are putting the pieces in place short of having the tests. And we want to do that. So as soon as we have those tests, we can offer that option to our family. So your option is, if you're quarantined, you can choose to quarantine. And some families do that. You can do the second option of the rapid test after 7 days, after 5 days, and return on the eighth day. Or do a test every day for 7 days and stay in school, assuming the tests are negative. So as soon as we have these tests, we will more formally announce that to the community. Right now, we're getting all the pieces in place to be ready to go as soon as they're procured. So to our board, do you have any questions about that? I mean, when you look at what we're doing, we are doing our absolute best to keep kids in school, because that is our goal. That's where we know kids need to be. And we're also doing that with a lot of guidelines from our health department, which are intended to keep people safe. So those are important too. Okay, thank you. I want to go back.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
I have a question. If somebody chooses to take the test, what is it, 7 days? Who would pay for those?
Well, we would. The state does. When I say we, I mean the state.
Okay.
So there will be no cost. Now, we've had a few parents approach us with situations where they could procure tests, and we work with those parents. But we can't provide them. If we get the test, we can provide them for free. And we're going to make it real simple, so that we can make it easy for our kids to stay in school. That's where we want them. All right, earlier this evening, we talked about Red Ribbon Month, so I'm changing directions right now. And I just want to go over a few things. You know, the Red Ribbon Month is really coordinated by our Coalition for Youth and Families, which is mentioned in the resolution. So I just want to go over some things that happen in our schools related to Red Ribbon Month. We think this is very important. We think keeping our kids drug and alcohol and free is extremely important to our mission of educating kids. And of course, it's important to the mission of a parent to raise their children in a healthy manner. So our coalition's very active. We're always very proud of our coalition. You heard how broad-based it is in the resolution, and working with local churches and working with people from local hospital associations to do the things they do. So here's a few things that will happen. The Chippewa Valley Coalition worked with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, and they've collaborated to create a social media campaign to educate parents and our community about the dangers of these things. In our elementary schools, there are drug prevention activities that will take place this month, including raffles. All kids love raffles, involving the signing of student pledges to remain drug-free. There'll be videos provided for classroom use, PA announcements, and classroom activities. And then there's always Red Ribbon Day, which will be on October 25th. Also, then in our middle schools, there are activities planned. And again, middle school kids are similar to elementary, and they like raffles. In fact, high school kids love raffles. Adults love raffles. But some of their contests are intended to encourage parents to talk to their children about the dangers of drug use. And schools will again be provided red ribbon for staff, PA announcements, and video materials created by Chippewa Valley and Dakota high school students to be shown to our middle school students. And we know that high school students are very influential with middle school students. And then we also will provide drug prevention information to our students over the TV monitors at our high schools. Our food service is involved and our district cable station is involved. And this is really a worthy effort. And for that, I want to thank the coalition. Continuing with coalition activities this Saturday, and this is also worked through the coalition and arranged. It's the Be Aware of Youth Suicide 5K walk and run. And that will be held at Dakota High School as it is every year. It starts at 9:30. And it is a very important event to many people. And when you attend one of these events and you have an opportunity to talk with people who have been impacted by this, it means so much to them to think that there is a community support system. And once again, I applaud our coalition for doing this because our district is unique in the way we participate and plan and run these types of activities. And then I want to end with this. I want to end with possibly the best monetary value anyone in our school district can possibly find, and that's attending our high school musicals. This coming up 2 weekends in November is on this stage right here is Seussical, the musical done by Chippewa Valley High School. And it is well worth the price of admission. It is better than any experience you will have at a movie theater. I've been watching those promos for those movies and they're dark and dreary. This is about a good time and fun, watching the incredible talent of our high school students. So I encourage everyone to attend. So board members, we'll work on getting you tickets. If you want tickets, you deserve it. And to our community, please consider attending. It's always so gratifying to watch our students who work so hard and have so much talent. And I must mention our incredible staff that gets them to display their talent in the way they do. So that's 2 weekends in November. That's Seussical, the musical here at Chippewa Valley High School. And with that, that's the end of administration reports. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Kay, up and by the board.
Mr. Bednard, I have something this evening. On the November 11th through Sunday, November 14th, we need to have someone from our board be a member of the MASB Representative Assembly for their annual leadership conference. I'll be presenting there, but I will only be there for that day. And so we are looking for somebody who would be able to attend the conference and be a member of our representative assembly.
Any board member wish to participate? Mr. Pearl? Okay, Mr. Pearl, you'll be attending for our school district on behalf of our school district at MASB. Ms. Adlam, would you be able to make the arrangements for Mr. Pearl to attend that conference as our delegate? Excellent. Okay, thank you, Mr. Pearl. Okay, up and by board. Things. Mr. Roberts said that the auditoriums for Dakota and Chippewa are going to be occupied for our next board meeting, which will be November 1st, I believe. Thought maybe we could move back to our regular board office as long as it's not under construction or being used for something else right now. I don't know, Mr. Roberts, if it's possible.
Yes, yeah, it's very much possible.
So we will convene back at the board office beginning November 1st. Go from now. Okay, subcommittee assignments, I placed Mr. Pearl into Dr. Andriasco's spots, and I moved from building site over to curriculum, and I placed Mr. Wojtovich in building site, because I know you wanted to get on that committee, so you're now on building site. Ms. Allen, would you, you know what, on that switch? Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm not sure, Mr. Roberts, about the fundraising for choir. Could you give us a briefing on that this week, maybe in our board package, or speak
Sure.
to that a little bit? Is there kind of commingling of funds, or is there something going on there where it has to go to a general fund, or if you could give us?
No, yeah, we'll look into that. We were not aware. I was not aware.
Okay.
We'll find out.
Okay, and we are association with national school boards. We do pay dues into that organization, correct? I know we get literature from them sent to our houses. Lastly, I just want to welcome Mr. Pearl back to the board. I think everybody saw the proceedings, perhaps on TV. Had 23 candidates step up in the community, which is fantastic. We're very, very happy about that people are willing to step up in this, in light of what school boards are going through now too, take the time to try to be a community leader. So we want to thank all those folks again. It's very difficult, as mentioned by our community tonight. Very good candidates on that selection too. Narrowed it down to 6, and then interviewed 6 last Thursday. And we're able to vote Mr. Pearl into office. So we congratulate Mr. Pearl, and we want to thank him for his continued service. Mr. Pearl was on our board for many years, or even go to Clinton Township, and now we needed to fill that void left by Dr. Andrasco, and Mr. Pearl has stepped up again. He has stayed with our district. He was part of our foundation board for Chippewa Valley Schools, so he continues in that spot also. So thank you very much for stepping forward here. Yeah.
That we are not members of the National Association of School Boards.
Okay.
And we do not pay dues to that organization.
Okay, so that answers that. Okay.
We are a member of the Michigan Association of School Boards. And I know that because I'm in certain memberships with Michigan, and you can always check your box to be national. And even when you don't check your box, you get information from the National School Board Association because they want you to check that box the next time. But we have not checked that box, so we remain just Michigan Association of School Boards.
Perfect. Very good. Okay, does it for me this evening. Anything else from the board? Hearing nothing else, can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Ms. Exec. Seconded by Ms. Pyden. Roll call vote, please, Ms. Pyden.
Yes. Myself, yes. Mr. Bednar.
Yes.
Mr. Pearl.
Yes.
Mr. Stovall.
Yes.
Wojtovich.
Yes.
Myself, yes. And we are adjourned at 8:17.
8:17. Thank you.